Hello and welcome to this week's Wyfutbol podcast with me, Michael Dryden and Etches Adokru. Today I am very pleased to say we are joined by Tom Spring. Tom is a scouting and recruitment analyst, formerly of Bournemouth, during their time in the Premier League. Tom is joining us today to discuss his background, the role of a recruitment analyst, club recruitment policies, how players are identified, and we'll discuss what the future of scouting and recruitment looks like. So Tom, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you, Michael. And yourselves?
Yeah, we're good. Thanks, mate.
Not too bad. Etches is still reading from yesterday's Arsenal defeat, but we won't go too much into that, I don't think.
It's one of those things where I've stopped getting upset now. So I think now that I'm past that, I'm looking forward to next season. The Championship, I think, will really suit us. So yeah, we'll just leave that one there.
Yeah, clearly not bothered. So to kick things off, Tom, I thought it'd be good to introduce you, get your background. So can you kick us off with how you got into football?
Yeah, sure. How I got into football? Well, I've always played football from a young age. When I was a kid and stuff like that. But the nuts and bolts of it, I think, what you guys really care about is how I ended up in professional football. So we'll skip we'll skip a few chapters, shall we say? Um, but I was educated in Dubai. So my mum and dad moved out here when I was 12 or 13 years of age, and I began coaching at a local football academy. And
Yep.
so I started my first, backroom team sort of role, if you like, as a coach. I graduated from my school A levels. I went to Bournemouth University to
Yep.
study sports management. And during that time, that was a key moment because AFC Bournemouth were advertising for a performance analyst intern with the academy. It was a free role, an internship. A voluntary role.
Yeah.
And I took it. I went for the interview. I got the job. And to be honest, it just started off with just filming, the academy games the youth team game on a Saturday and the academy age group games on a Sunday. And then as I grew into that role and made relationships and produced good filming, I was then asked to produce some work, etc., etc. And that's how I fell into the football club. And I worked during my university course. I had a placement year, so I took that option to spend with AFC Bournemouth full time, and it was half of the year was in performance analysis, and then the latter half of the year was with the recruitment department, which was supplementing the under 21 team at the time.
Yeah.
And then upon my graduation, I was afforded a full time job, a full time contract within the first
Mm.
team recruitment department. So I I just worked my way up slowly but surely. Impressed with my work, one would like to one would like to imagine, and made some good relationships along the way. So that's how I fell into the role.
Yeah, it's interesting. So was recruitment analytics kind of the end game? Was that something you always wanted to do, or as you said, just fell into that, or something you developed at your time at Bournemouth?
Do you know what? I'll be really honest with you, Michael, and I've honestly never disclosed this before, but every single role that I've been in terms of, when I was coaching, I thought, yep, coaching's for me. I really want to coach.
Yeah.
And then I saw this performance analyst role. I didn't really know what it entailed to begin with. And then I went into that and I was like, yep, I really want to do performance analysis. This is for me. And then when I got into recruitment, I was like, yep, like this is 100% for me. This is the one. Um, so but I do honestly think that I joke, but I do honestly think that recruitment and scouting is for me. It's definitely my favorite role, and I think I've been in scouting and recruitment for a number of years now. That I'm no longer, in my mind, good enough to become a coach or good enough to go back into performance analysis. I mean, yes, you can work at it and improve, of course you can, but for me, I think I've been out of those disciplines for a little bit too long now, and yeah, I'm more focused, and I desire to improve myself in the scouting and recruitment discipline and work my way up within this discipline.
Yes, I suppose when you're a student, like most football fans, you wouldn't know what these roles particularly entail at a football club, or what roles were even existing at a football club. And a lot of these roles are obviously ever expanding, quite new to clubs as they get bigger, as obviously Bournemouth got to the Premier League, so these sort of departments expand. So the whole point of this episode is that we're going to dive into what those roles are, recruitment in particular, because they're such an unknown for fans. And so it must have been the same for you. Quick question before we go into the serious stuff, Tom, though. What is it like working for a football club? Is it how you always thought it would be?
Yeah, it's a good question, and even when I talk to my mates and stuff like that, they always ask me that as well, or well, they did previously. Um, it's a part of my character is I'm very devoted, and I'm very committed to my job, no matter what that is. I could be, you know, work. I could be a barista, and I'd still want to be I'd still want to be the best barista in Starbucks, if you like. So
Yeah.
my character trait, I found with that, bearing in mind that character trait that I have, I found that working in a football club was very time consuming. Um, you have to be available 24/7 because you never know who can phone and at what time.
Mm.
So yeah, time consuming is definitely one. It's Do you know what the best feeling is like? And you can imagine it like when you're going around for lunch or going around for breakfast or whatever, and after a game that the first team have won, you can imagine the environment is brilliant, and all the players would say hello, and you could have a conversation with loads of different staff, and it was a brilliant environment to be in when you've won. If you reverse that, you can imagine that the environment to be in was a very difficult one.
Yeah.
So working in a football club is almost bipolar, if for the want of a better phrase. It's one week it's an exceptional place to be, and the next week it's you would want to be as far away from there as possible.
Right, so kind of moving things on to the nitty gritty of what it's actually like working as a recruitment analyst or an analyst in general. One of the questions I've always wanted to know is, what is the process in identifying a player? Because sometimes I'll read a headline like everybody is tracking X. So how would you find that player? Is it through some type of metrics that you'd look at? Is it age profile? Is it from physical watching? That's kind of the question I wanted to pose to you first.
Yeah, well, it's different at every club.
Mm,
And I've only worked at one football club, Etches, to be honest. So
mm,
I can't really definitively comment on what other football clubs processes are. What I can tell you through my experience, that you say about metrics. Now that's one side of it. There's the data identification side of scouting, data scouting, if you like. But the side I'm most familiar with, the process to identify a player, well, in conjunction between a sporting director and a manager, you're given a framework to work within. Now, as you know, obviously you guys know AFC Bournemouth and the values of how they recruit players, and that was young British players. Um, so the basic framework I can give you, that the process we go through, or I went through my experience, was to recruit to scout players under the age of 24, and
Mm.
it was we would positional profile where there would be assigned attributes and skill sets from the goalkeeper down to the striker, and sometimes there'd be different types within that. So even though centre midfield is one position effectively, as you guys know, there's different types of centre midfielder. So we through my experience, there was profiled positions and different types within that, and they were each assigned attributes and skill sets, and that was technical, tactical, character wise, psychological side as well. So we were educated about all of these attributes and skill sets assigned to each of these positions, and then we were assigned leagues to go and watch. I was assigned two leagues within Europe. And then it was essentially up to you, get to work, watch the games, find the players that excite you. So those are the processes. Now, I will touch on, and please bear in mind I'm not an expert practitioner in data analytics, but I absolutely love data, and I love data analytics in scouting, and I'm working hard to become a skilled data analyst as well, to be honest, because I think it'll be a valuable part of my skill set. So there is not a new way, because I'd say for Brentford as the most famous club,
Yeah.
recruit through data, and there's essentially they would look at the data side of scouting is you would look at event data. So it could be progressive passes into the final third, etc., shots on target, etc., whatever it might be. There's loads of different event data. I can't think off the top of my head, but now you're seeing more clubs do that, and they have to hit um, a certain benchmark figure in order to be, whittled down from 100 players to 20 players, just to have a look at the pool you want to fish in effectively.
I see. So you touched on something which really rang a bell to my Football Manager days, which was which was character. I remember one time on Football Manager ages ago, I think I signed a player that had, I think his character, they have a little description on their personality. And that's kind of a question that I remember I listened to a podcast years ago where they would talk about Football Manager and how they actually went out and found out about these players' characters. Is that part
Yeah.
of what you'd have to do as well? And how do you actually do that? So if I'm a really brave, committed player, how would you actually find that out? Is that just from watching how the player's behavior, or would it be through other ways?
Yeah, tough question. I think that if you're a scout, I think it's
Mm.
or a recruitment analyst, that technical scout, whatever the role may be. For me, I think you have to simply judge the player from their performances with on the pitch, because if you have a preconceived idea about a player because of his off-pitch antics, it's gonna bring bias to the table, and effectively that can distort decision making. So for me, I'm very much one that just judges players on their performances on the pitch. Um, how it works, or as again, this is just through my experience. So there would what I've been through is that I've worked alongside someone in the department who was a consultant, who would that was their role. As soon as the targets had been decided by multiple scouts and the chief scout and the technical director, it would be their job to filter that information to the consultant, who would then go about doing his job, which was doing the background checks on the player, making sure that speaking to former teammates, former managers, friends, etc., and that would be a comprehensive background check on the player's lifestyle, and then that would be fed back to the technical director and the manager, who would then decide whether it was, whether they passed the character referencing test, essentially.
Okay. I've always wondered, because it's one of those things which is very important in football. You want to have the right type of personality and character. I wasn't too sure how you go about it. So the next question I kind of had was, how long do you watch slash analyze the group of players for? So you're assigned two leagues. I assume, okay, 1 week X and Y were really, really good, and then the next week it was J, for example. Do you then follow them closer and closer, or is it more of like an overall thing, and then you look back as the season goes on as to who particularly stood out?
Oh yeah, another tough question, Etches.
Pretty going down.
I'll ease up after this, Tom.
No, please, no, it's good. It's really good, actually. Yeah, so it's important that you. For me, I think the best way to keep track of players is to clearly define how you bucket them. So of course, when you go and scout players, you're going to find players that you want to sign. Like, you just know that they're good enough, and they can, you sign them, they can play in your starting 11, and then you'll know that some players are a shortlist, maybe at the bracket below a sign. You wouldn't outright sign them, but you want your chief scout or your technical director to take a look and reinforce your judgment, if you like. And then you might find that that another player is the best in your region, but if you compare that player from, say, Germany to England, the player in England might be a better fit for your football club, if that makes sense. And then you have players that you might want to monitor, not quite ones that you want to, they're not quite the best in the region, but they excite you. They show something that your club wants in terms of the profiles that you're asked to look for. So for me, I think keeping track of a player, to answer your question, is about how you clearly define and bucket the types of players you're watching and where they fit within your estimations. And yeah, so for me, that's the key. And it, it's difficult because sometimes, yeah, like you say, one week this player's doing well, and then you might not get to see him because you've got other responsibilities on or whatnot, and then the next week you might play poorly. But if you bucket them, for me, you know where they are in your mind, so that when you do go back and watch them, you can say, okay, 2 weeks ago he was in this bracket, but now I've watched him again, I might be able to elevate him, or I might be able to de-escalate him. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's quite clear. So more on that. So I remember I posed this question to Dave Seymour a few weeks ago, or maybe a month or so ago now, and it was kind of like, when you watch these players, you said that you're aspiring to work more with data, but from the data information you do know, let's say, has there ever been a player that you've watched quite a few times, you think they're a really, really good player, but then maybe statistically from the bits of data you've looked at, they don't actually match up at all? Has that ever, have you ever come across that before? Or is it often they go hand in hand, right? So, if you look at Messi's stats, it doesn't really matter whether you watch him or not. You can clearly tell he's a good player.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just that in that scenario in which you give. It's the other one as well. It's where they look tremendous on the pitch, but the data doesn't really back it up. So it's yeah, it's one of them. Sometimes it goes hand in hand. Sometimes they're performing really, really high in the data. Sometimes, and they're not looking so great on the pitch when you watch them. And the other times they're performing really well in the pitch in your eyes, but the data doesn't necessarily back that up. So there's a multitude of what's the word, variations of those equations, if you like. Um, it's For me, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, though. I think if you critically assess that, it might be that, okay, so I've scouted a player, or I'm scouting a player and I'm liking the look of him on the pitch, and then his data isn't backing that up. Well, maybe I need that's a good trigger point for me to take a step back and assess that and be like, okay, maybe my bias is elevating this player more than what he actually should be, and vice versa. If the player's data is really, really high, then, or really, really low, and I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe his data is a bit low in terms of his event data. But when I go and look at him on the pitch, maybe that's because the recipient of his progressive pass or switch of play, whatever it is, isn't there. And scouting performance versus potential, and then using data to supplement your opinion, is an art. That's simply what it comes down to.
Yeah, no, that brought back more Football Manager vibes as well when you see the player ability / player potential, the same thing. But it is really interesting, the point you just made, because I never really thought about it. Something as really, really basic as passes completed could be very poor for a player you like. But then, for example, I know that's not the brilliant metric, but let's say the recipient of it actually has a poor control, therefore the passes are incomplete, or maybe the connection wasn't there with the player. So something I haven't actually thought about before. So that's a really good point. So we're quite near January at the moment, January transfer window. As an Arsenal fan, it's not a great time of year. We're normally linked, like normally we're always struggling. So we're linked with like an overpriced, middle-aged type of European player who's probably not going to do very well. But for you and your experience at clubs, is that everything kind of seems to go out the window. So, Odi Nigalo at United last year is a really good example where he appeared out of thin air and was in the Premier League. How does that kind of work from your side of things? So this whole system about how you prep and people move into buckets, can that be accelerated during the January transfer window? Like, does planning kind of go out the window?
Yeah, I always say, Etches, that I think I said it to Total Football Analysis actually. The timetable of during the season, it's really nice because you have an element of, well, yeah, a large element of routine where you're watching a couple of games in the day, or you're sorting out your shortlist, you're preparing video presentations or player dossiers. You have a good little structure. But when a transfer window comes along, it's not anarchy, but it's not quite the same really. And you always have to be. I always say that in my own head that you have to be proactive to the reactive. So you're always going to be reactive in a transfer window because you're reacting to different stimuli, which might be, okay, an agent, as an example, has rang up the manager or the technical director, and and it might be that a player you thought was unobtainable is now attainable, but we haven't watched him for a number of weeks because we were under the impression he was unobtainable. So it's like, okay, we can get this player, all hands on, everyone watch him or her, whatever it is, and give us your opinion. So it's like you have to react, you have to be proactive to reacting to the stimuli that you're given, and that's probably the best way I can describe a transfer window, because you can do all the preparation in the world, and it comes to, so what, yeah, like you say, we're approaching January now, so I'd say in November, all the positions that the manager has asked that he wants us to recruit for, you've given your options from your countries that you're covering. You could be as prepared as you like, but as soon as you're in that transfer window, you might not be able to get this player that you've put forward, so you have to think of your next one, but you haven't watched your next one for a number of weeks, so you have to watch him again. So yeah, the January transfer window, and most transfer windows, you do have to be very proactive.
So, without naming names, you've obviously worked. Some players have come in during windows, or you would have had colleagues at other clubs that have brought in certain players through the January transfer window. Do you think it's useful? So, I am of the belief that really, really deep down, the majority of January transfer signings tend not to be a success because of the reactive element to it. There are Aubameyang's out there are Bruno Fernandez's out there. I think there's a few other players off the top of my head as well. I can't think of now, that have been brilliant January signings. I love Aubameyang still to pieces. I put my life on the line for him. But generally speaking, there are a lot of other ones that fall by the wayside. So, what are your thoughts looking at being on the other side of it as to whether it's successful or not?
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna dislike me here, Etches, because I think if I provided an answer to that question, it would be arbitrary. It would
Mm.
be, there's no. For me, my interpretation of that question is there a formula for a successful January transfer window, or a formula for an unsuccessful January transfer window?
Mm.
And the honest answer is no, there isn't. Without sitting down and assessing every single successful January transfer window signing, it's difficult to give you a good answer for that question. So my apologies.
No, that's completely fine, Tom. What I was gonna do with that information was obviously message the Arsenal board themselves, so we can get the right players in to turn our season around, because the championship is looming.
My experience with it is, I'm not going to totally sit on the fence for you, but
Mm.
for me, like, I come from a club and a manager that had a clearly defined philosophy, and that really honed in and focused on granular detail and little intricacies of trigger movements, etc., etc. Now, if you want a, a player to come in, it does take a bit of time for that, through my experience, and an adaptation period for that player to come through and understand the club, understand the manager, understand the philosophy, all the granular detail and intricacies about what he needs to do when the ball's here, what he needs to do if this player does this, or when this player receives the ball here. So there's a lot of facets that go into the philosophy that I've come from, the one that I know. So for me, that's probably the overriding reason that sometimes January transfers don't work out, is because it takes time to adapt and understand a style of play and a philosophy, and you're asking a lot for a player to come in January, understand it, and perform at the highest capability that this player can between January and May to get results for your football club. So I think for me, that's probably the overriding reason for unsuccessful January transfer windows.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Clubs and fans, you want a quick fix or an immediate fix to a certain problem, right? You're not going to sign unless, if, as you said, someone is available that wasn't available before. You're ideally signing someone to literally hit the ground running. That phrase, hit the ground running, is used all the time by players coming in. So I think you are right. There's that added pressure, whereas a summer signing is normally afforded a year because it's that thing of, oh, well, they've come from X country or this team. Whereas a January transfers is literally like, right, ready-made, he experienced or whatever it may be, and he has to definitely perform. The final question I kind of had for you, Tom, was, can it be this whole thing of, the consultants, the technical director, whoever it may be, can it be really difficult to convince certain people either above you or around your level over certain players? Or can it be quite difficult to kind of prove your case? So you said you were given 2 leagues. I assume someone else will have another 2 leagues, and these players kind of battle it out. I'm sure there are players you've looked at where you've thought, this is the guy, for whatever my club may need. So can it be quite tricky to convince management over it? It can be quite competitive.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the biggest. The wrong adjective to use is frustrating. It's one of the. I can't think of the right adjective to describe it, but it is one of those. It's one of those things that it does happen, and it can be difficult to accept because you know you're doing a lot of work on a player. You might watch this player 10 times, and you're adamant. You've omitted all your biasness. You've omitted all the you've studied this player inside and out. You've presented him through the right channels, and it just comes down to that player's performance. It can come down to timing. It's probably, frustration is probably the right word for it, because like I say, you put all this work in, but the seniority, that your superiors may watch him on an off day, and that's their minds made up. Do you know what I mean? But essentially, I I always give advice to people about this, because if you work in professional football and recruitment departments, especially, sorry, specifically, you will come across this. And for me, you have to be willing to accept it. These guys, your superiors, are in those positions for a reason. They are expert practitioners, technical directors, head coaches, managers. They are there because they're severely talented people. They are the expert practitioners in their field. You have to trust their judgment. And if their judgment is not aligned to yours, you have to accept that. And you have to be, motivated to find the next one. Because if you just carry that on with a chip on your shoulder, that what is the point in promoting the next player if it's going to be
Yeah.
the same outcome? You will find that we're all human at the end of the day, and we all do have emotion. But you have to be, a scout's job is to be motivated to always find the next one. Even if you sign a player, Etches and Michael, it works. It works the other way. You could convince the manager to sign a player that you scouted all that time. You put in all the hard work, and you get a pat on the back, and you think, okay, yeah, cool, this is great. But you can't rest on your laurels in that aspect either. You have to be motivated to go and find the next one. So it works both ways.
Yeah, I suppose finding that gem or uncovering that Alexis Sanchez type player is the yeah, treasure trove for anyone in your profession. But as you say, it can work both ways. And also, I mean, football is a massive game of opinions. So trying to convince those around you that a player is suitable, and then even once that's achieved, there's so much workings within a football club of that player if that player will actually eventually come in to play for the football clubs. You've got so much around you, but you're completely right there. So yeah, moving on to future of recruitment, Tom. So we might be surmising a bit here, but I thought we'd finish on some kind of more interesting questions around where recruitment might be heading, and sort of scouting in general. So firstly, is there, just from your time at Bournemouth or looking forwards, are there any leagues or particular geographical areas that you think clubs are targeting more? Maybe because they're cheaper to source from, they're an upcoming kind of, I don't know, force in football. And if so, where do you think that is?
Another good question. It's do you know what? This is something I'm researching actually, uh, and I'm really big on. See, I like I avoided a question because I didn't want to make an arbitrary statement, but I'm gonna
This is the section for those. This is
yeah,
the section.
yeah, I'm gonna kind of submit an arbitrary statement here, um, which is I I have a belief in me that countries have a period, like a cycle, where like there's a certain age group that just comes through, and they all come to fruition at one point. Like when France won the World Cup, the amount of talented young French players that were coming through, a lot of them signed for Barcelona, Ousmane Dembele, etc., etc.
Yeah,
Um, and before that was, or I can't remember if it was, yeah, before that was Belgium. Like Lukaku, De Bruyne, like
yeah,
they had that cycle where there just was several of them coming through and um, really, really performing at a high level and making people take note. At the minute, I guess England, you could throw England in there. With Greenwood, Foden, a couple of players moving across to
yeah.
Portugal, for example. So for me, I think that there's a cycle where I'm changing the question slightly, Michael. So
Don't
please accept my apologies. But
worry.
yeah, I kind of think that there's a cycle where countries are just it goes through a cycle and they produce the best players for a certain year, certain season, or a couple of seasons. Now, I'm really keen to delve more into that, but I want some real you know theory and references to underpin that. Academia. So yeah, that's what I believe. In terms of leagues or areas that clubs are targeting more, I think difficult one to answer because you want to find the best players in every league, especially if you're a Premier League club. You're going to want to stretch your resources to covering every league and knowing about every player. Obviously, it's near enough impossible, but you're gonna try your best to do that. So I
Mhm.
can't exactly give you a specific answer in what leagues or areas people are targeting more because it does vary. But I definitely think that there are certain countries and certain cycles where there's a hotbed of talent coming through. Would you guys agree with that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, I think the cycle argument of the or idea is very prominent because if you look at Belgium, if you look at France, I mean, obviously France won the World Cup in '98. They went through then a long spell without achieving much, actually not really surpassing the group stages in a lot of competitions. And it's almost that idea that for a golden generation to come forward, the previous generation to an extent has to flop because otherwise they can't all come through at once, and that's a challenge. It's a good challenge to have. It's a good idea to have. But I certainly would agree with that. And I think going back to your point about it's difficult to say what leagues, what areas clubs are targeting more these days. I suppose it also comes back to the idea of, well, it depends on the club and the club in question. So each club will have their own transfer policy. They'll have their own budget, I suppose. So when I was referring to geographical areas, if you'd look at, say, for example, Salzburg, who've signed a lot from Africa in recent years,
Mm,
that's because their organization seemingly is looking to develop in developing nations, is looking to branch out into kind of uncharted territory to an extent in terms of those particular countries and leagues.
yeah,
Um, is in kind of directly bringing players from out of those areas, and also because if you can pick a gem out of one of those countries, then you're going to pick them up quite cheaply, as opposed to going to an established nation, as you mentioned, like France or Belgium, where those you might have to pay a bit of a
yeah,
premium.
and for me, I think Salzburg and the Red Bull franchise in general, to be honest, are real innovators because Salzburg use FC Liefering, which is the almost like a second team, a feeder team into Salzburg, where they sign those players from those developing nations, and you only have to look at Naby Keita and Amadou Haidara, who came through Liefering, moved into Salzburg, and obviously Haidara is now at Leipzig, and Naby Keita is at Liverpool. So they do it really well. And then you have Nordsjælland as well in Denmark, where the owner also owns Right to Dream Academy in Ghana, and they take players from the Right to Dream Academy in Ghana and give them a platform into their first team. And you can see that it has results because Mohamed Kudus went to Ajax for 13 million euros or something something this past summer. So you can definitely see that those methodologies of innovative scouting are working, and hats off to both those clubs for sure.
Yeah, and kind of building on this might be another tough question, but is there a particular type of player that you think has become more sought after? Again, drawing perhaps on your experience, I think in the Premier League we had a kind of an influx of kind of this idea of bringing in this technical number 10, and that isn't just at the top of, say, the Premier League. We saw clubs even like Crystal Palace bringing in like Max Meyer, for example. It's not maybe the best example, but we saw a number of players come into the league fitting that mold. Do you think that's changed now?
Yeah, again, I guess that it comes down to cycles again, and I'm not going to go into cycles again because I don't have the theoretical academic information to underpin it, which I'm big on. But I think that the most obvious example or story I could give you is obviously England. We didn't have a left back half post Ashley Cole for many years, and now we could. I thought I saw something on Twitter very recently that England could fill their whole side with a fullback or whatever it was. So I would say to answer your question directly, Michael. Yeah, I would say that the wingers and forwards most sought after because they're the most exciting. That's the business end of the pitch. But with the way the game's changed, I think fullbacks have probably, to answer your question, become the most sought after in recent years.
I think what we're seeing in football now is you don't see as many specialists. So, we're getting players like David Alaba, who I've seen at centre back. I've seen him at full back. I've seen him at cam. We've got Trent Alexander-Arnold, who plays full back but can also play in midfield. You've got a lot of players now. I think Emre Can plays at CB, plays at CDM. I think when you go back to maybe 10, 15 years ago, there are a lot of positions where you had a guy that was a specialist in that position. And
Yeah.
now what we're getting is a lot of players that are extremely dynamic. I saw Ferran Torres play up top for Spain, but then he predominantly plays wide for City. And what we're seeing is a lot of these players are multifunctional. So even though, they may not, Aaron Lennon is a great example. Classic old school out and out winger, goes past the man, whips the ball in. Goal output was quite minimal. You don't really see that anymore. Someone of his build is like Sterling, I would say, but then Sterling is so much more than that. He can play in a two just to behind. He can play up top on his own. He's got so much more to him, and I think that's kind of what football is. It's going towards a bunch of guys that are so multifunctional that what is sought after is that their
The
ability to play
versatility.
multiple. Exactly, 100%.
Yeah, I think that comes down to the players nowadays are technically so good. Like, the academy coaching gets a lot of stick sometimes for players and sometimes lacking heart. You see a lot of those articles in the media, don't you, that are almost berating academy coaching for making them too technical. But for me, that's why they're so good, and they have that versatility because Trent Alexander is essentially a flawless technician that he's capable of playing very well in midfield because technically he's so good. He can receive the ball in tight areas. He scans his spatial awareness. Like, he's just got the ability to do that because of how technically and tactically good he's been brought up with the level of coaching he's received.
So just to kind of end on here now, Tom, it's kind of, again, quite a far-reaching question, but so what do you think the future of recruitment analytics looks like? So just to give that a bit more
Yeah,
meat on the bone, are we moving to, do you think, more of a largely data-driven approach to identifying talent? I think Etches touched on our episode we had with Dave, Dave Seymour at Total Football Analysis, and he touched on how, the field is moving more towards data, but you still have coaches who are still are more receptive to, this is more on the performance side, but more receptive still to the old school methods, and that perhaps could translate to scouting. So how do you see the future of kind of recruitment?
yeah, I think the data, the recruitment and scouting side is definitely moving towards a more data driven approach, a more more modern approach as opposed to traditional methods. But I see that as a good thing. I think I know I can't say this lightly enough that having implementing a perfect blend of both, balance is so key and so important in this matter because if you employ data specialists, there's an argument, and I'm not saying that it's the the true it's a true notion, but there is an
Mm.
argument that perhaps that their knowledge of the game is not as comprehensive as those that have lived it, breathed it, been involved in it, etc., etc. Now, if that data person can work with the more traditional person, to enhance their knowledge, and the data person can enhance the traditional person's methodologies about how things can be done to make the process more efficient. I think that's brilliant. You need to be able to
Mm.
work together, work in conjunction, and you the old adage is you can't get to every live game out there. So why not um, cover loads of video games? By the time it takes to travel to a game, etc., etc. So the data side is, and the video side as well, with Y-Scout, etc. I think it does benefit the game massively, and I would say that balance is key, and if you can get that blend right, then you're onto something really, really special. The other side of it is, in terms of where I see the game going, is at the minute you have a lot of competitors, as you do in every industry. A competitor for a video platform, a competitor for a reporting and shortlisting system, a data provider, and a data visualization provider as
Mm.
well. So, producing scatter plots and frequency tables, etc. Now, for me, I think that there'll be a platform in the near future that encompasses all of those things. So you'll have, like a Y Scout, but you'll have a really comprehensive reporting and shortlisting, or really developed reporting and shortlisting system as well. You'll have a data provider incorporated within it. I just think you'll have all these, there's different providers out there that you have to subscribe to, to keep a competitive advantage. And I think that in the future, there'll be one platform that encompasses all of those things.
Yeah, no, I think the future looks quite, it's interesting in that aspect, and I think it's definitely something to look out for. One of the things that you touched on earlier, which I really wanted to ask you a question on, Tom,
Yeah.
was this: how clever Michelin are, and how clever Leipzig are. Well, not Leipzig, but the Red Bull network. And what are your thoughts on Premier League clubs being, what's the word I'm looking for? More not innovative with the people players that they sign, because I'm sure they are, but take bigger risks. So what I mean by that is, I think the way I look at the Premier League at the moment is someone like Gabriel Martinelli joining Arsenal. I don't see that common with other clubs, because I think what happens is with the larger teams is what they tend to do is, this guy is really good statistically. We may watch him, but he's playing in, let's say, Czech Republic. So what tends to happen is he'll move from Czech Republic to France. And then when he starts performing in France, his price goes up, and then Man United then rub their hands together and say, okay, let's go and buy him now for, quadruple the price. The question I kind of have was, do you think we'll see in the future, with the strengthening of data and analytics, bigger clubs opt to make larger risks on players? Or is it that element of, the gap is just simply too big no matter how good they are?
I'm going to give you my famous sit on the fence answer here, Chez.
It's a good one. One I've
Yeah.
come to know well.
No, I
Tom.
think do you know what? It's a question I ask myself, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of people will be asking themselves that as well. To be honest, because it's essentially, if you can go and cut out that player, if you can go and cut out the middleman or the middle club in this example to save money. If you can go and get the same player for 30 million less than what you've had to pay for him, then 100%, like that's a positive. So, like you say, a player could go from the Czech Republic league to Liga in France for 5 million, but then a Premier League club is having to spend 45 or 35 million for him. Then, if you can go straight to Czech Republic for 5 million, of course you save yourself that capital of 30 million, whatever it is. So, that is a benefit, but the counter argument to that is if that player had not made that move to France in this example, would he have become that player, that 35 or 45 million pound player? It's a rhetorical question, of course it is, but you have to ask yourselves these questions because I hate to say it, but the level of football around, it differs from some leagues to the others. That's just how it is. That's
Yeah.
the football world. So there is an argument that players, they maybe have to make that move to make them the player that they become or could become. But should Premier League clubs back themselves and back their staff, and in terms of their abilities to improve that player or develop that player into the 35 or 45 million pound player that we're referring to? Arguably, yes, as well. It's no right or wrong, I guess.
No, you're certainly right. I mean, that what you touched on there around, if a player is playing in a league, not even like the Czech league, where it's, they'll have teams in the Europa League and will go quite far, but in other nations, say in Africa, how can you determine whether that player is capable of playing at Premier League level if they're only playing with players that aren't of a certain quality? And I guess that is where um, the Red Bull network is so good because they've got teams at almost each end of the spectrum. So you've got Liefering up to Leipzig, so they can then have players come through almost promote or graduate up that network. But yeah, it's an interesting discussion indeed. But I think we've run out of time there, Tom, and I really appreciate you, and we both really appreciate you coming on today. It's been some great insight on the recruitment side of the game. Good luck with your future endeavors, and you had a bit of homework though, I think, that you're getting back to us on, so please do complete that. But no, thank you very much, Tom, and it's been a
Really
pleasure.
appreciate it, Tom.
No, my pleasure. Thank you both for having me. I really appreciate it.